Hey y'all, this is Brown at I Have Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about the novel Dragons of Autumn Twilight. This was the first novel in the Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy, and it was written in 1984 by authors Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. So, this was basically an adaptation of a series of games, or I guess you would technically call them gaming modules, from the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons series of role-playing games. So, Dungeons and Dragons is something that I am somewhat familiar with, but I've only been able to play a campaign of it once a few years ago, and unfortunately we didn't get to finish it. Real life got in the way, but I mean, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I'd very much like to get back into it at some point, even if it's just one more time. But the thing is, Dungeons and Dragons, it's something that it can start off as a set campaign, but somewhere along the way, the group of friends that you play with can sort of take the story into any direction that they want, depending on the results of victory or defeat within the game. And so, with that in mind, Dragonlance was based on, or I should say, the Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy was based on a portion of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game modules. And as I understand it, it basically adapted a certain number of those modules, but with a set ending. And so, by the writers' own, I should say, by the author's own admission, they feel like with this first novel in particular, because they were writing specifically to adapt certain game modules, they felt kind of constricted in terms of, say, the amount of freedom and openness that they had to operate with, because they were working with a set of rules and a set of, I guess you could say, established characters that on one hand they were charged with fleshing out, but because they had to sort of follow the trajectory of the games at that point, they were limited as to what they could do, and as a result they felt like that the novel was too episodic, and so starting with the second book in the Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy, from what I understand, Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman went out of their way to try and make the writing feel less episodic. And so I've yet to read the other two novels in the trilogy, but after having read this, I could definitely see where they're coming from, because in a lot of ways, even if one, such as myself, has not played, the particular game modules that this book is based on, it really does feel like it's kind of an episodic adaptation of a role-playing game. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because on one hand, it kind of throws you into the fire, when you're in the midst of this aftermath of this, I guess you could say, magical cataclysm that's affected the world over, and everyone's trying to pick up the pieces, and you have these characters who are trying to find a purpose in life, through various means, and they come together and end up going on a journey that could very well result in the salvation or the destruction of the world that they live in. And for the record, the world that this series of novels is set in is called Krynn. And so the writers definitely do a good job of introducing readers to the world of Krynn and establishing the lore. And they also do a good enough job of introducing us to the main characters and giving us enough backstory with them to where, I mean, even though the book does feel like, you're reading a straight up adaptation of, a role playing game, like maybe a Final Fantasy role playing game or a Dungeons and Dragons role playing game. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like. I mean, the writers do a good job of giving you enough backstory with the characters to where there's enough depth with them that the readers care about them and are willing to go along on this ride, even though it is a bit episodic. But at the same time, the lore that's established, I mean, the world building that comes into play, it's very well done, and it definitely keeps the reader intrigued as to where things go from here. Because I really enjoyed this book, and I thought it was a good way of introducing first-time readers to the whole Dragonlance setting, and I really liked the characters, and I thought that while the novel's definitely more high fantasy than, say, the grimdark fantasy I'm used to as of late from, say, like the Warhammer Fantasy setting, there was enough of an element of darkness and danger to where, even though with the genre of high fantasy, there was a bit more hope that's in supply. There's still enough of a threat from the side of evil to where, I mean, you don't really know for sure who's going to live and who's going to die. I mean, you get the feeling that good is going to come out on top, but at the same time, though, while that's a strong possibility, you also get the distinct feeling that there's going to be a price. And so I thought that was an interesting little bit of contrast between, say, the high fantasy setting of Dragonlance versus the grimdark setting of Warhammer Fantasy, wherein, I mean, there's a lot more, I guess you could say, of a morally gray area in the Warhammer Fantasy setting, wherein, say, even characters who are actually heroic are basically put through the ringer, and if they come out alive at all, I mean, there's no guarantee that they come out alive and victorious. I mean, they may survive the ordeal, but then they realize that the whole world is condemned, despite all the sacrifice they've made. And so, like I said, it's an interesting contrast between I guess you could say, the settings of Warhammer Fantasy and the settings of Dragonlance. And so it took some getting used to for me, but at the same time, I found myself enjoying the ride here, and I definitely would like to see more of the world of Krynn, and I want to see how the characters turn out in the next two novels in the Chronicles trilogy. But okay, so there's kind of a lot to keep track of here, and so I was kind of having to backtrack here and there, but I'll try and give y'all I guess you could say an abridged version of the story, or a synopsis, if you will. And so it starts off here where there's a poem that sort of tells readers about the ages before the main story is set, where basically in the world of Krynn, there were this race of there was a group of deities called the True Gods, who were worshipped by this all the races of Krynn, but there were also these dark gods, and so there was this war between these dark gods and the true gods, and only with the intervention of the true gods, with a human warrior, he this warrior was able to make a weapon called the Dragonlance, which he was able to use to defeat the forces of darkness, mainly, but most especially the dragons that the forces of darkness used um, in their campaigns against the races of Kryn, and in an attempt to take over. And so the forces of good ultimately triumphed, because it turns out that there were other dragons as well. I mean, some dragons were good, some dragons were evil, but with the creation of the Dragonlance, though, those in the service of the true gods were able to turn the tide against the forces of evil, the dark gods, and were banished for a time, or the dark gods were banished for a time, and so the races of Kryn, especially humanity, began to prosper, but somewhere along the way, they became prideful and arrogant, and to a point where, say, they became corrupt, as I guess you could say, a species. And so the true gods, from what's understood, with the legends and what have you, the true gods basically turned their back on the world of Kryn, and as a consequence, there was all this devastation, and there was a new threat that came about, and like new races of evil that made their presence known. And so those who had initially worshipped the true gods were basically praying, asking why did you leave us, but they received no answer. And so the book picks up sometime after that, and it's after the cataclysm is what the setting is referred to, I believe. But a group of companions, though, has basically reunited after a series of adventures on their own, and they meet up at this tavern to basically fulfill this vow that after a certain amount of years they would get back together and go on another journey together, because while they had initially journeyed individually and had their own adventures and trials and tragedies, they had come together in the past as a group of friends and adventurers. And so the main characters that are introduced here in this novel are Denis Half-Elven, who is kind of the de facto leader of the group, and as his name indicates, he's a half-elf and half-human hybrid. And basically he sort of grapples with the, I guess you could say, mixed emotions he has, and the inner turmoil of being a hybrid of both races. But the thing is, the union that produced him was not a loving one. It was basically, in the midst of a war between humans and elves, a human soldier had, basically, raped, the woman who would turn out to be, the mother of Denis Half-Elven. That's how he came to be, and so, he's got a lot of inner turmoil, from that, trying to, kind of balance himself between two worlds, between, humans and elves. And so he also has kind of a love triangle thing going, wherein there's a human woman who was a part of the group. Her name was Kitiara, and she was this warrior woman, but she, for reasons unknown, has not returned, to the meeting place, which is at this tavern where the group was supposed to meet up after all these years. And so basically he's kind of dejected about that, but he's in love with her because she has a certain vibrancy, a certain joy for embracing the chaos of the unpredictable nature of life, I guess you could say. But there's also an elf maiden named Lorena, sorry, from the Elven kingdom, which he had initially lived in, and so basically he's got that love triangle going on, but in the meantime though he's mainly focusing on his duties as the de facto leader of the group, and basically trying to keep everything together and keep everyone alive. And so you also have Sturm Brightblade, who is a knight of Solomnia. And Solomnia is a kingdom that was initially highly regarded by the other I guess you could say kingdoms of Kryn, namely the human kingdoms, but due to reasons that are only alluded to initially, Solomnia had fallen into disgrace, because apparently the Knights of Solomnia had been blamed by the other kingdoms for not being able to prevent the cataclysm. That's initially referred to in the beginning of the book, in the opening poems and what have you. And so so Sturm though is a member of this order of knights, and he's basically made it his mission to try and find whatever resources he can, whether it be artifacts of magic or written words, to legitimize certain claims or what have you, or titles, if you will. Anything he can do to try and bring respect and legitimacy back to the order. And he basically values honor above all else. If he gives his word on something, he will die keeping it. And so he's human. So you've got a half elf, half human hybrid in the form of Denis, and you have a human warrior in Sturm Brightblade, and then you have Reislin, who is a sorcerer who had initially been, I guess you could say, more healthy and vibrant, but after an insane ordeal wherein he was going through this savage ritual to acquire more magic, he succeeded in gaining more power, but the consequence was he's basically reduced to a very emaciated, sickly figure, and also his skin has taken on a gold sheen, and his eyes have this sort of weird, golden glow to them, and Reislin, he's probably the most powerful person in the group, simply because of his skills in magic, but physically speaking, he's probably the weakest of them. But he also is someone who scares the group, because not only does he have this deep connection to magic, but he also has his own agenda, which he refuses to let anyone in the group in on. And the only time he does so is only in instances of grudging necessity, and even then though he refuses to tell the group everything. And so the group kind of they respect him for his power, but they also fear him and are reluctant to trust him when he gives his word on something. And so basically there's this division between himself and the group, because he refuses to let anyone in on what happened with him, and the price he paid, or what he's trying to do, what he's trying to gain. And so he also has a brother who is also a part of the group named Caramon, who is a human warrior, and it basically has the strength of several men, but he's also a gentle giant. And he's loyal to his brother, and his brother is Riceland is the person he cares about more than anyone in the world. But he also fears him, though, for the aforementioned reasons, for the fact that, he has this darkness, to him now, due to this, having survived this, savage ritual, which transformed him. And so he knows that his brother's up to something, but he can't bring himself to try and, get his brother to, tell him or the group, what he's wanting to do. And so, you've got someone who is fiercely loyal to, his brother and the group, but also has a bit of divided loyalty, between his brother and the group. And so you also have Flint Fireforge, who is a dwarven fighter, and is definitely the oldest member of the group. And so even though he, probably looks like someone who's in his 60s, as far as, if you were to look at him, he's definitely humanoid, but, as a dwarf, he's very short and what have you. So he looks like a 60-year-old dwarf, but he's far older than that. We're talking hundreds of years old at least. Excuse me. And so he's definitely the oldest, person in the group. And, some could argue, he's probably the physically strongest member of the group in some ways. But the thing about him is he kind of sees himself as, the, father of the group, and he's, constantly having to keep these, youngsters in line and out of trouble. And he hates water, as in he hates, having to swim, because of, one of the group's adventures, nearly resulted in him drowning. And so it's like ever since then, trying to get him to cross any body of water is an ordeal. And so, but Flint Fireforge, though, he has like his own sense, like, as a dwarf, he has a sense of honor that almost rivals, that of Sturm Brightblade, in his, quest for redemption, but his sense of honor is basically ingrained as a racial, quality, so it's not just an individual thing, it's like a racial thing for him, but, you get a lot of, cultural, perspective, from the character of Flint Fireforge as far as, how, he sees the world and what have you. So while, the book may not focus as much, on his perspective as, say, some of the other characters, like, say, Denis Half-Elven or someone like that. The perspective that we do get from him, though, it's rather fascinating, because, you're getting things from the viewpoint of a character who is from another race entirely. And so you also have Tasselhoff Birdfoot, who is what a member of a species, or I guess you could say a race, called Kender. And so, as I understand it, Kenders are, called handlers. That's kind of their nickname. Because they're almost like dwarves in a way, but maybe a little bit more. It's like in terms of stature, they're about the same size as a dwarf, but they also tend to be, I guess you could say, almost like hobbits, if you will. So it's kind of like, trying to differentiate between hobbits and dwarves from Lord of the Rings in that sense. But Kenders are basically the hobbits of the Dragonlance, stories. But another thing that's interesting about Kenders, and in turn Tasselhoff, is the fact that Kenders are basically they're entirely without fear, because of their, I guess it's the way their race is made up. As a racial trait, they literally have no fear. So whereas some people run screaming from danger, the Kenders will go, smiling into danger because, ooh, shiny, stuff like that, because, the reason they're called handlers, though, is, they can't help it, themselves, but to, quote unquote, borrow things that are just laying around, even though these things may not be theirs. And so, Tasselhoff, whenever we're reading from his perspective, it's interesting, reading from his point of view because he's a very optimistic character, simply because he literally has no fear whatsoever. I mean, he cares about his companions and his friends, but at the same time, though, he's not going to let the potential end of the world or the rise of darkness, distract him from, taking a look at, say, an object that's locked away, like maybe a jewel or a pie that's out on a table, but clearly for someone else. I mean, he's going to help himself to both of those things, regardless of whatever's going on. But also, though, Tasselhoff, I mean, his curiosity, in some ways kind of, gives him a sense of improvisation. And ironically, he's been just as responsible for getting the group into trouble as well as getting the group out of trouble, because of his, unending curiosity and fascination with, everything around him. He'll find a way to get the group into trouble, but then he'll find a solution that, helps get the group, out in one piece, go figure. So, he's kind of a source of frustration for the group, but at the same time, though, he's definitely regarded as a valued member of the group, because he's basically become like family to the group. But so this was the main group initially, including the warrior woman Kitiara, who, for reasons unknown, has not met up with has basically turned down meeting up with the group. But at this tavern, though, they're met by two other individuals. One is Goldmoon, who is the daughter of a chieftain, tribe of. She's the daughter of the chieftain of a tribe of barbarians. And basically, she has in her possession this blue crystal staff that is the source of a lot of trouble in the world as of late. Because multiple factions are looking for this staff. Because it has these powers that are basically a gift from the gods, and namely, they allow her to heal someone, someone who's hurt and at the point of death and what have you, and also it allows her to defend herself against, say, someone or something that's of an evil or otherworldly nature. Such as an instance wherein she, uses the staff to, touch someone who's in disguise, only for that staff that's usually of a healing nature. The staff ends up, burning this, individual who's in disguise, and basically revealing them as, a monster, someone who's not human. And she finds herself conflicted because, she's acting on behalf of her tribe, to try and find out, where this staff came from and, return it to its rightful source or rightful owner. But at the same time, she's in love with her traveling companion, who's also a member of the same tribe, a warrior named Riverwind. And he was the one who was given the staff initially, and in turn gave it to her. But basically, he was a lowly member of their tribe, and the two of them loved each other. But because of his low-born nature, he couldn't just ask her hand in marriage. And so her father, the chief of the tribe, sent him what was ultimately a suicide mission to basically prove his loyalty and to the tribe, and his love for the chief's daughter, for Goldmoon. And so he ultimately ended up in this shadowy city that had decayed and fallen apart, and death was flying around on dark wings, in his words. But at one point, though, this mysterious glowing figure, when he was at the point of dying almost, and he was delirious, gave him this staff and charged him with getting out of this city and back to his tribe, and so basically guided him out of danger. But unfortunately, though, once he presented the staff to the tribe, on one hand, they basically refused to believe his stories, even though the staff was clearly supernatural in nature. But they refused to believe that he saw this I guess you could say godlike figure. And so basically he and Goldmoon leave the tribe in an attempt to find out where the staff came from and who it really belonged to. But in the process, though, they end up in the crosshairs of multiple factions that are trying to find the staff for themselves. And so so these two end up joining the group of the main and becoming part of this group of the main characters here. And the village that they're in ultimately ends up being attacked by an army called I believe they're called the Draconians, or Dragon High Lords. And basically these Dragon High Lords are in service to this dark goddess, or this dark queen, if you will. And she was one of the dark gods that was initially banished by the true gods, and the warrior who wielded the Dragonlance all those years ago. But basically there are all these signs and potents pointing to her return. And sure enough, Riceland, as someone who's connected to magic, is able to confirm that she is coming back. And so as the village was attacked, the group of companions, they ultimately decide to go on this journey, because they're needing to find out why everyone's wanting this staff, and also is there a way that they can turn the tide against these Dragon High Lords, who are increasingly attacking the civilized kingdoms and bringing them to ruin. And the Dragon High Lords are also working with hobgoblins, and trolls, and other monstrous, I guess you could say what you'd call monstrous races, if you will, orcs and what have you. But another person who comes along with the group is a woman named Tika Whalen, who was actually a barmaid at the tavern that the group had initially met up at. And she ultimately becomes a part of the group, and finds herself falling in love with the warrior Karaman, Riceland's brother. And she's wanting to prove to the group that she can hold her own, but at the same time be worthy of Karaman. And another person who eventually becomes part of the group later on, once they come to the Elven kingdom that Tanis Half-Elven used to be a part of, Laurana, the elf maiden that he was in love with, she becomes a part of the group as well. but she's trying to prove to Tanis Half-Elven that she's not the lovesick child that he remembers, because he's trying to tell her that whatever they had was a long time ago and it's over. And basically, because of his half human nature, it would never work between them. But she's hopelessly in love with him, but she's also trying to prove that she too can hold her own against the forces of evil. And so you have both Tika and Lorena as these two characters who end up joining the group later on, and ultimately proving themselves to not only be loyal to the men that they are in love with, but also as valuable members of the group. And so somewhere along the way, though, they also meet this old wizard named Fizbin, who is this seemingly crazy individual, or like demented, I get. Like, he seems to be going through dementia of some sort, because it's like one minute he'll be like yelling at a tree or something like that, but then the next minute, though, he'll actually conjure up this powerful spell. And basically there's more to this guy than meets the eye. And especially Wrestling and Tasselhoff, the two of them had these rather memorable encounters with him, wherein they both realized that this guy is connected to something. Like, he's tied to the I guess you could say the powers that be in some way or another. But whenever they're realizing this, Fizbin is able to erase their memory, or at the very least make them forget that they found out the truth about him, or they were starting to find out the truth about him. But it seems like in some respects, he's playing the doddering old fool who just happens to know a few spells. But at the same time, though, it feels like he's just playing the part. Like, he's actually a very wise and powerful individual, wizard, if you will, but out of necessity, in order to survive in this world that's being taken over by the forces of evil, he's having to downplay his power. Like, he's having to act like he's a complete idiot who just happens to know a few spells, So, yeah. So this group of, friends and comrades and companions, they, find themselves on this quest to, find out, where the staff came from, and, which in turn, leads to, them being charged with finding these artifacts called the Discs of Mishakal. I hope I'm saying that name right. Which are these discs that have these writings pertaining to the true gods, who may once knowledge of them is basically given back to humanity, or I guess you could say the races of Kryn. Knowledge in turn leads to faith, and faith in turn leads to the return of the true gods, and the power, or faith giving the true gods power. And so it's like one thing kind of leads into another, and it's a constant quest for an artifact, or a source of knowledge, and what have you, and in the process trying to outwit the forces of darkness. And so okay, so that's kind of just the general setup here. There's a lot to keep track of, and in the process, though, as we're learning more about our group of main characters, our protagonists, we're also learning more about this world, because we get glimpses of wondrous events or horrifying encounters. And so we get these little snippets of lore here and there about other entities or monsters or other people from the past, and so it's this constant bit of world building. But then these moments are then pushed aside in favor of the main story of trying to find out where the blue staff came from, and how it in turn pertains to the discs of Meshakal, and how that in turn is going to lead to Kryn being given a fighting chance against the forces of darkness. And so in a lot of ways, I really like this book, and I'm just going to say it. I liked the book. It was fun. It really took me back, to, my time in, say, like, my junior high or, high school years when I used to read fantasy books a lot. And so the tone of the book, really took me back to that time. And it had to where, there was definitely a stronger sense of idealism, because of the high fantasy setting, but at the same time, there was that possibility that, certain characters may not come out of this alive, or if they survive this book, there's no guarantee they're going to survive the next one, that kind of thing, because while there's more hope here than, say, other fantasy settings, there is still a sense of danger. And so while the forces of darkness may be delayed, there's no guarantee that they're going to be defeated, if that makes sense. And I like the interactions between the characters, because as the book goes on, Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, they do a good job of, having these characters have a unique, chemistry and banter with one another. And, certain, instances from past adventures come up in conversation, and that have bearing on something that's going on in the present and what have you. And so even characters that are mentioned as having been a part of their adventures but don't actually show up here, sort of add to things, because of how the characters remember them and what have you. And so and I liked that while there's more of a focus on some characters more than others, each of the main characters is given a spotlight, in terms of, say, whether it's getting inside of their head and finding out how they're feeling about things, or what's going through their mind and their thought processes. But also when we get to see them in combat, their fighting styles are very different from one another, and oftentimes you have some characters being more direct in combat and others being more deceptive. And I also liked how because this book on one hand is trying to be a straight up adaptation of a set of game modules that had already been established in the Dungeons and Dragons campaign that was going on in the 80s. I mean, there are certain things about some of the characters that are kind of set in stone, but at the same time, though, I liked how the writers had just enough creativity and freedom, to sort of throw a wrinkle into things, to where, like, for example, the character of Riceland, we know he has an ominous, hidden agenda that may very well lead to, the deaths of the group later on, or maybe the, further descent of the world of Kryn into darkness, even if he gets, more powerful himself. And so we know that there's something up with him. But at the same time, though, there'll be these quiet moments, wherein he'll basically, show a strong amount of, empathy and gratitude, to, say, lesser off individuals who, have nonetheless endeared themselves to him. And in the case of, say a gully dwarf named Bupu, who, kind of, takes a liking to him, you know, she, ends up, trying to help him. And, there's a nice little quiet moment where, he actually, does his best to ask the gods to, bless her, and, saying, whatever, darkness is coming, please let her be spared from it. And so it's like you have these nice little moments like that show that, yes, this guy is a schemer, and yes, there is a darkness to him, but at the same time, he does, care for those, who, I guess you could say, show that they care for him. Now, granted, I mean, there's a bit of a divisive, that it's a kind of a divisive point between him and his brother Carmine, because Carmine obviously cares for him as his brother, but Carmine also fears him, and so that sort of adds to the cynicism that Raistlin has. And another thing is, he sees no point in trying to save the world, because one of the side effects of this savage ritual he was a part of, that along with transforming his skin, it also gave him these sort of hourglass eyes, in the sense that whenever he looks at someone, he can already see them decaying, on a almost microscopic level. And so that sort of you get the idea that that's one of the main sources of his cynicism. Like he may have already been a cynical individual in the group's earlier adventures prior to his transformation, but this quote-unquote gift of being able to see time break things down, it's just warped his perspective. And I guess that sort of adds to his despair, or his desperate energy and initiative to try and find whatever sources of magic he can, for whatever his purposes are. But with that in mind, though, when he has those quiet moments where say someone unabashedly tries to help him without fearing him, he does have gratitude. And I liked how you have those moments that sort of play with your expectations of a character like him, of a dark, potentially villainous character like him. And so, you're definitely left with, these characters, all these characters here, while there are certain, traits and tropes that, kind of go hand in hand with this being an adaptation of, a series of games, within an established setting. There's enough, I guess you could say, flexibility, with writing the characters, that, the authors were able to, throw in these moments that remind readers that, there's more to these characters than meets the eye. And so even if they are one thing, they're not just that one thing, if that makes sense. And also, I liked how there were certain moments in the book where, there would be characters that were introduced of, say, a magical nature, like, say, this unicorn who's called the Guardian of the Forest, that there's a forest that they have to go through at some point, that's guarded by the dead, but because they're able to ultimately communicate via magic, their intentions, they're allowed safe passage, and they meet this unicorn who's the guardian of the forest. And so you have these moments with characters like that sort of add to the fantastical and mystical nature of the world of Krynn, and add little snippets of lore here and there, and so you have like an idea that there are all these, characters and creatures with their own stories that, we're only given a glimpse of while we're in the shoes of the main characters, with the driving, focus of the story being with them, but we're nonetheless able to catch a glimpse inside, the minds of these other characters who, not being human, are often, filled with a sense of, weight and age, and that, definitely show that, there are far more stories to tell. And so, another character that, I'm just giving you another example, but at the climax of the book, though, most of the dragons that the characters meet in this book are straight up evil and terrifying. Like they're powerful. Like, just their presence alone can send shockwaves of fear, through a human population of a town. If that gives you an idea of just how powerful they are, and that's before they start breathing fire. Okay, but with that being said, there's a dragon that's introduced, at the climax of the book that initially, we're thinking, oh crap, this is going to be another source of horror and danger. But while there is a source of danger because, well, it is a dragon that was around during the time of the cataclysm, so not on the side of humanity, we get a glimpse inside, her mind, and, we see that, she suffered a horrific loss and, basically is under the delusion that, these children that she's being tasked to guard, like these human prisoners, are basically her long lost, baby dragons who, once they grew into adulthood, all ended up, dying horribly in this, battle during the cataclysm. And so, you get a glimpse of a, horrific time in the past, and you saw that even though she was quote unquote on the side of evil, as it were, just by from the standpoint that she was a dragon, with the majority of the dragons who are basically on the side of darkness. She was a creature who, was a mother, and, she had, those in her life that she loved and lost. And so it's really sad when, you see from her perspective that, these children that she's been being tasked to, guard, to keep other prisoners in line. It's kind of moving in a way because, in her deluded state of mind, she sees them as her, long lost children. And these children in turn see her as like this surrogate mother figure, which, really, throws the group of, the main characters off because they're like, wait a minute, what? And because they're not expecting, anyone to feel, such emotion for a dragon, and so yeah, I liked how, you got these, characters of, I guess you could say, a more magical nature that we briefly get a focus on, and from their perspective, we're just, getting more and more of this world, and learning more about how things were and what came to be and what have you. And of course, with the main characters, we see them grow, on this journey and what have you. And, and also liked how, even though they're the main characters and odds are they're going to come out on top in a fight more often than not, I like the fact that, the writers went out of their way to show that, yes, these characters are skilled and in some cases, powerful, such as in the case of Riceland, but at the same time, they are mortal. They're not, almighty or immortal. Like, they can die, they can get hurt, and some of them get hurt very badly. And so, I mean, and also like in the case of Riceland, I mean, yes, he's the most powerful member of the group because of his magic, but he's also the physically weakest member of the group. And so it's just kind of a check and balance, type of thing that they got going here. And so it's like when the characters, when some of the characters, get grievously injured in combat, I mean, you're kind of like, I hope they come out of this okay, that kind of thing. Even though you kind of can tell that certain characters do come out okay, or at the very least to make it to the end of the book. I mean, at the same time, just the fact that some of them are injured as badly as they are, it keeps you invested, I guess. And so, so on one hand, I definitely understand the main complaint of the book about how it feels, very tropey, or, very much RPG-ish. Like it feels like a straight up adaptation of an RPG game, which, I mean, it ultimately is, right? And it's predictable in that sense, but at the same time, there's enough effort put into bringing the characters to life and establishing their relationships with one another, to where when things get down and dirty in terms of, say, combat or something like that, or danger, I mean, we are invested in them. We do care about them, and we want to see them come out on top. I mean, we want to see them play a part in giving the forces of light a fighting chance against the forces of darkness, and thus saving the world of Kryn. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give Dragons of Autumn Twilight 5 out of 5 stars. This was a good book. I thought they did a good job of introducing new readers such as myself, to the Dragonlance setting and the world of Kryn, especially since this was the first book that was written that was based on the Dragonlance portion of the Dungeons and Dragons game modules and what have you. And so so I liked being introduced to these characters and seeing them interact with one another and seeing them grow and just within the first book alone. And I liked seeing these glimpses of bits from the past in this world, of the time of the cataclysm and what have you, or pre-cataclysm. And I liked seeing how the forces of magic were depicted, as well as, say, the moments where spiritual entities make themselves known and what have you. So it really did feel like a world that on one hand had wondrous characters and creations populating it, but at the same time it felt grounded in a form of reality, in the sense that there were ordinary people just trying to make their way through this world that's heading into darkness, but at the same time this darkness wasn't guaranteed to be forever, as it were. And so so it was a good introduction. Not like I'm giving it 5 stars, because I mean, for what it is, I mean, I thought it was an excellent, high fantasy, adaptation of a role-playing game series. Even though I haven't actually played the game, I mean, I felt like I had a, slightly, better understanding of, I guess you could say, that particular setting. But I will say that I have read better books that have come after this one, wherein I guess you could say things don't feel so episodic. If things feel more gradual and natural in terms of transition, but at the same time, I mean, I thought that the writers did a good job of working within the confines of what they were having to work with, if you will, because of what they were trying to adapt. But seeing as how they apparently tried to be better about developing the characters to where, or having the journey not be so episodic. Starting with the second book, I definitely want to see how things turn out after this one. So I will definitely be reading the other two books in this Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy, and I look forward to seeing how things turn out for our main characters in question. So Dragons of Autumn Twilight, I'm giving the book 5 out of 5 stars. A great introduction to for what was for me a whole new world. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Good night. Bye.